Hello and greetings once again. Welcome to my vault of all things EC. Tommy Burns here, and today we're going to talk about something that seems to get a lot of interest on the EC Fan-Addict Club page over on Facebook, and that's the British EC horror comics reprints of 1954. There were only 3 of them. They were published by the Arnold Book Company in England. They had the rights to a lot of the American comic book material, and they did 3 EC horror comics that are highly sought after. They're pretty hard to find, and they're really hard to find in nice shape because they're square bound, and they don't travel well, let's put it that way. But here they are. This is Haunt of Fear #1, and this reprints material from Haunt of Fear and Shock Suspense Stories #14, along with some non-EC material as well, and it uses the cover for Haunt of Fear 23 there. Here's Tales from the Crypt #1. It's got the contents from Tales from the Crypt #40 and Crime Suspense Stories #23, again along with some non-EC material at the back. And here is Tales from the Crypt #2, which reprints Tales from the Crypt #41, Crime Suspense Stories #19, and the story Space Suitors from Shock Suspense Stories #11. This is the only one of the Arnold Book Company EC reprints that has all EC material in it. So here's the set. Very hard to come by. The one that's probably the most common, just in my experience, because I've had 2 copies of Tales from the Crypt #2, and I've also seen multiple copies go up for sale. These 2 are really hard to find. It's kind of tough for me to say which one is harder. Just based on my experience, I hardly ever see Tales from the Crypt #1, but I've also got folks who have been looking for Haunt of Fear #1 for years and are unable to find them. They were printed in black and white, so these contain 2 complete EC comics reprinted in black and white. It's just the 2 Tales from the Crypts and the Haunt of Fear. Vault of Horror was advertised, but it never came out. There are existing letters to people who had ordered comics from the Arnold Book Company that said pretty clearly that Tales from the Crypt #2 and Black Magic #16 were the last horror comics that the Arnold Book Company published. The thing that's really cool about Black Magic 16, I'm going to open this one up and show you. The back cover advertises the line of EC comics, and as you can see, it advertises the Vault of Horror, which never came out. Just based on the dates and the fact that some of the Vault of Horror #36 panels appeared in house ads for the Arnold Book Company's line, I would imagine that the Vault of Horror, if it had been published, would have used the cover for Vault of Horror #36, but it was never published. It does not exist. So there you go. I first learned about the British EC horror comics from this book, A Haunt of Fears by Martin Barker. I highly recommend it. It's pretty dry reading, but it's also got some really fascinating history in it, and it's the first place I ever learned that there were any EC horror comics published in Britain. Now, there's a couple pieces of ephemera that are reproduced in this book that I sought out over the years. One is Comics and Your Children by George Pumphrey, and this little pamphlet, it's an anti-comics pamphlet, kind of akin to what Wortham was doing in America at the time, but it reprints the cover of Tales from the Crypt #1 along with some panel reproductions there from Tales from the Crypt #1, Comics and Your Children. The other thing that's reproduced in A Haunt of Fears that I had to have a copy of is a spread from this issue of the Picture Post. So right here you've got horror comics. Is this the end? The answer is yes, it was the end. Horror comics were completely banned in Britain, and it was a ban that lasted for decades. But as you can see here, Tales from the Crypt #2 reproduced. And when I saw this illustration in Haunt of Fears, I noticed that it said not suitable for children there in the corner. And I thought, wait a minute, that's not Tales from the Crypt #41, which I knew very well because it's the first original EC I ever bought. So I recognized the art, but that not suitable for children, it took me a while to kind of put 2 and 2 together, and I realized that's not the American edition. So you can see there between the P and the T in Crypt, not suitable for children, and of course the EC logos have all been removed. It's the Arnold Book Company, and it's ABC Chillers was the name of their horror comics line. So there you have the British ECs, and just as a point of interest, I've got a couple other British comics that used Johnny Craig cover art from American ECs of the pre-trend era, and there's no EC material inside, but they're worth having for the covers. So here's Saddle Justice number 4, along with Boys Ranch, which used the Johnny Craig art for Saddle Justice number 4 on its cover. So this is a British comic that uses Johnny Craig art, even though there's no EC material inside. Here's another similar example. So Crime Patrol number 10, and then you've got Crime Detective, a British comic that used the cover art by Johnny Craig from Crime Patrol 10. And again, no EC material inside. So there you've got what I would call my meager collection of British ECs, but again, there just weren't many. I want to dedicate this video to Dave Dustin, who is, in my mind, our leading expert on British horror comics, and without him, I wouldn't have a lot of the material that I just showed you. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and hopefully I'll come up with something else to talk to you about real soon. Join us over at the EC Fan-Addict Club on Facebook. Spa fun.